So, as you all know, Terminator Zero is about to drop on Netflix. But before Terminator Zero drops, I want to do two videos around the Terminator franchise in general. The second video is essentially going to be me just ranking the Terminator films that's going to drop a little bit later. But this first video, I actually want to take a second and I want to focus on Terminator Genisys because I've been on this high horse for a few years now where I believe Terminator Genisys went wrong because it told the wrong story. And what I mean by that is, in the scope of the film, it takes this concept that the Terminator wasn't sent back in time to kill John Connor. It was instead sent back in time to kill Sarah Connor when she was a young girl. And of course, we get a flashback scene where we see the T-1000 attacking Sarah Connor at her beach house with her parents, killing her parents, and then her being saved by the Arnold T-800. Then we jump forward in time, and Sarah's already a grown woman and she's encountering Kyle Reese, and she's still fighting the T-1000, and then John Connor from the future is now a Terminator, and then the story unfolds from there. I believe that the correct story that should have been told was a story between the Arnold T-800 and a young Sarah Connor. At the end of the film, if you want to age up Sarah Connor and it turns out that she becomes Emilia Clarke, fine, that's cool. However, I think that there was a level of exploration that we essentially missed out on. And what I mean by that is the idea of the Terminator developing feelings has been something we've explored multiple times in the past. We've explored it in Terminator Salvation with the hybrid Terminator. We explored it in Terminator 2 as he became more of a friend and father figure for John Connor. We explored it a little bit in Terminator 3, even though that Terminator basically stated that, yo, that experience you had in T2 has nothing to do with me. But throughout this journey, I'm coming to realize why it was that the variant of me in Terminator 2 was so friendly and father-like with you. And I believe that we should have explored that concept with Terminator Genisys. Terminator Genisys should have been a story about a young girl who tragically and brutally loses her entire family, who is suddenly thrusted into essentially a time war where robotic assassins are going to be constantly sent essentially into the past to kill her until either they succeed or Skynet is destroyed in the future and these future assassins simply just stop. And this concept that the Terminator that shows up is cold. It's following a mission. But then as the story progresses, as it goes on this journey with Sarah, it begins to develop quirks. It begins to develop feelings. Whereas before it may have just, I don't know, she's cold and she's alone and she's crying, tossed her a blanket because, you know, I have scanned your body temperature and you require a blanket in order to remain a functional human being, blah, blah, blah. Now it actually gives her that blanket with care. It maybe sits next to her. It holds her hand. It starts doing human things in order to allow this girl to essentially cope and begins falling into essentially the role of the father figure that she essentially just lost. But on Sarah's side, it's a mental shift after going through this traumatic event. Her being with the Terminator and essentially having the Terminator teach her ways in which to survive or ways to get out of and escape dangerous situations and how to basically combat and kill all of these futuristic Terminators that are going to be coming after her, turning her into a much earlier warrior than her future counterpart is something that I think a lot of people would probably have enjoyed watching, because you can't tell me that there is not a market for extremely well-written female characters in action films, especially if you're somebody who sat down and you've watched Prey or you've watched the most recent Alien films or any of the Alien films, and a lot of the favorite parts that you might have from the original Terminator 2 or the original Terminator did involve the older Sarah Connor doing super cool shit. The concept of having a child basically thrusted into this situation, and then both the child and the machine coming together to not only protect each other but end up caring about each other, where she can end up learning to care about someone that is basically of the design of the thing that came back and killed her parents, and then he can learn human emotions to basically want to protect this little girl outside of the parameters that were set for him in his programming. Would have been a fantastic film to essentially explore. But Terminator Genisys instead chooses to go the generic route, which is you introduce a really, really cool situation and an interesting concept of this girl going off with the Terminator for the next 10, 12 years to essentially become a badass, where we even hear about them eliminating and destroying multiple Terminators just around the country over the last few years, which is something that's super cool to basically explore. This idea of basically a Joel and Ellie existing in the Terminator universe, where the Terminator takes on the role of Joel, being the more brutal one to finish targets off, and the Sarah Connor basically turning into the version of Ellie, who's basically learning these elements about how harsh the world actually is, and about the fact that the best hands that she's in is in the hands of a cold-blooded machine, but that cold-blooded machine learning how to basically be more and more human to make her happy, but not realizing that what it's striving for is its target's happiness, and then discovering that later on and being cool with it. I would have loved to explore that, because one of the cool concepts they end up using in the very next Terminator film that rebooted the entire franchise was this idea of a Terminator that essentially retired and went off and raised a family, to which I basically said multiple times that one of the coolest concepts would have been to watch the Arnold Terminator, after it completed its mission, go off and basically start a family and try to integrate into society, other than the crap story I ended up getting for Terminator Dark Fate. But that's just me. Let me know what you guys think about Terminator Genisys. Do you think Genisys gets a bad rap for being a bad Terminator film? Or do you think that it's a decent Terminator film, but they just chose to essentially focus on the wrong story? And then there's also an argument about whether or not Emilia Clarke was a bad choice for Sarah Connor. Let me know. Comment down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.